Stirring up race and class conflict is the basis of all discussion of the Communist Party's work in the South. The evil genius, Stalin, and the other megalomaniac leaders in Moscow ordered the use of all racial, economic, and social differences, no matter how small or insignificant, to start local fires of discontent, conflict, and revolt. Who could tell which of these issues could start a general conflagration that would sweep across the former Confederate States from Maryland to Texas? Black rebellion was what Moscow wanted. Bloody racial conflict would split America. During the confusion, demoralization, and panic would set in. Then finally, the Reds say, workers stop work. Many of them seize arms by attacking arsenals. Many had armed themselves before. Street fights became frequent under the leadership of the Communist Party, and the workers organized revolutionary committees to be in command of the uprising. Armed workers seized the principal government offices, invade the residence of the president and of his cabinet members, arrest them, declare the old regime, abolish, establish their own power. The only fear of the white communist leaders was that, as a result of their effort, this black rebellion would break out before they were ready in the decisive industrial cities of the North. What if 1 or 5 million Negroes died in an abortive attempt to establish a Negro republic? Is not the advance of the cause worth it? A communist is not a sentimentalist. He does not grieve over the loss of life in the advancement of communism. This plot to use the Negroes as a spearhead or as expendables was concocted by Stalin in 1928, nearly 10 years after the formation of the World Organization of Communism. Prior to this time, the periodic Moscow gatherings did little more than pass resolutions. Any credit for the change belongs to the handful of Negro lip-spittles like James W. Ford, Harry Hayward, Otto Hall, Lovett Ford Whiteman, and Otto Hinswood, to mention a few. They were the ones who again and again begged their masters in Moscow to force the white leaders of the Communist Party in the United States to organize and use the Negroes. They were the ones who got in on the ground floor of the conspiracy. They are the ones that history may well record as the political Uncle Toms who plotted with a diabolical alien power and moral decay, physical slavery, and spiritual death of their own. That, my friends, was Manning Johnson and his book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense, from the 1950s. And this is AllMinucOne. I'm Bill. Please, folks, if you like this, share it, subscribe, leave a comment, insult me, tell me I'm ugly, I don't know. Say whatever you want to say. I'll probably reply, unless it's just really off-the-wall nonsense. But all that stuff helps me grow. And, I'm not the only person out there talking, but I am someone out there talking. And let's get the word out. Let's talk about these evil ideologies, and let's get them out of our American way of life. Because the American way of life is the best way of life that you could possibly imagine. It is leaps and bounds greater than what communism would ever present to the world, despite what communists believe or have to say. Now, today I'm going to talk about the history of the Democratic Party. I'm probably going to do this in 2 parts. I don't think I'm going to get through all this today because it will run rather long, and I usually run 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes to an hour, depending on the video. And I just feel like, it'd be easier to just divide this up. I also have been busy with other things. I was trying to get this out last week, but it just didn't happen. So I've had this set up, kind of, sort of, ready to go. And One of the things that prompted me to do this particular video was this video from the rapper Paris, Nobody Move. Now, Paris aligns with communism and the Black Panthers. But what I really found interesting about this video is that I love the artwork, actually. The artwork's visually amazing. I like the style of it. And the video is also very propagandistic. And it's also a really, if you would, fat beat. It's quite cool. I actually like the beat. The message, though, is horrible. But it's actually a really good song. I kind of dig, but, it is what it is. But anyways, I'm not going to play the song itself just for copyright reasons. Now, I don't make any money, but let's just watch it real quick. We see a lot of communist fists. We see revolutionaries in the background. We see a pig there and a gun. Of course, a pig's a cop or anyone, whatever, against this Black Panther type party. Obviously, that you see the chains of the black man and all this stuff. Again, I mean, this art style is just quite awesome. It's got this pulp comic-y thing going on to it. Talks about American imperialism. We keep going. It's asking for justice, and everyone's moving to the beat. But yeah, like if you want to hear the music, go check it out for yourself. There's, obviously language. It's a rap video. But like I said, I think it's pretty cool. Other than I think the message is absolute garbage. I mean, this is about uprising, a revolt. Let's see here. Let's wind that back for a second. It says the White House. I've still got 2 more months to go. It shows some stuff. This video just came out. I actually saw it because randomly, apparently it came out on September the 11th, right? But randomly, this was on a video ad. So this is interesting. So we got Trump holding blood. We got McConnell. We got George Bush. And then we got Mike Pence. Now, this is one of the things I actually want to cover. We will get into about who was in the Ku Klux Klan. And let me tell you, folks, every single one of them is a Democrat. There is no Republican who was in the Klan. The Republicans, we'll continue to dive into history, but the Republicans were the ones that wanted to free the slaves and let the slaves go. And actually, initially, often thought about either having a slave colony, like giving people, the black community, their own like island in the Caribbean, or sending them back to Africa. This was Lincoln's original ideas. So yeah, I only saw this again because it was paid for in a Facebook ad for some reason, randomly came up. Now you see there, you have these are other, communist revolutionary types. Obviously, that's a callback to Vietnam. If you knew what the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia, I don't think you should be celebrating this so much. Here we have Trump supporters as if they're all racist, and of course they're going to be locked up. So again, this is propaganda nonsense. It is what it is, guys. It's art. I mean, it's the way art goes. For every pork chop, there is a frying pan. And this is just really like a call for violence. Like, there is no real active KKK. So over in Sharpsburg, Maryland, near where I grew up, not too far from where I live now, in 2012, 13, I don't know when it was. You can look this up, though. Herald Mail's the local newspaper. They even had a thing in the Gettysburg newspaper about this. There was a Klan rally. I worked for the sheriff's department at the time. They were having all kinds of people in overtime, hundreds and hundreds of cops. You know how many people showed up for the Klan? Like 6. 6. Now, Sharpsburg is down by the Battle of Antietam, the Antietam battlefield, that is, and therefore it has a historical significance. And these people thought they were going to rally up and go there. The only white supremacists that I really have ever met in my life were like truly were all biker type dudes. They were, the Aryan Brotherhood type guys who were in jail. And very rarely did they actually act out their violence. But yeah, I've met those people. They're few and far between. They're not really the majority of anybody. So, anyways, this goes on. More Trump. Like, Trump's had, all-time low, historically, black unemployment. He's been working with these black Republicans, got the Prison Reform Act out, did all kinds of things. I hope in his second term he does something about the insanity of the American drug war. But, folks, this is what propaganda does. It just shows you a bunch of stuff, and it looks cool, and it sounds cool, and it appeals to your emotions, and it's, look at this. This poor black dude. Right? I mean, the cop badge there said 666. Again, though, it's beautiful artwork. It's absolutely incredible. Here's the other thing, and it's really crazy because they think that if, I guess the idea, the cause of all these black folks stand up to the white man, that there'll be some sort of war, race war, and they'll win. But the population far exceeds the black population. Here, another thing is immigration, folks. That's another thing that hurts black men and women because it takes lower skilled jobs. It actually hurts everybody. But it takes lower skilled jobs. If you have a large black community in a city and there are lower skilled jobs and you have a lot of illegal immigration, those people will often get those jobs because it's easier to get them in, pay them under the table, that kind of stuff. And then you have other men who are trying to live their life and work get priced out of a job quite often. Like, there's also welfare, social resources that get drained because of that. Again, maybe I'll do a video on immigration at some point. It's a hard one to crack down on because there's so much misinformation and disinformation. But make no mistake, there is absolutely welfare for illegal immigrants. So again, the Black Panthers are coming. And so I just want to go a few more minutes. There's a scene in here. Look, there's all those white hands. There's a man bun. There's a little Kaepernick throwback here. I actually looked at the lyrics. I can't remember if he says I'm giving the finger to Kaepernick or something like that. Fake news is the enemy of the people. Again, this is all right. Here we go. This is one scene I wanted. So Reagan was a very good callback to conservatism. Got hijacked by George Bush, Herbert Walker, and GW. But Reagan was a good callback to traditional conservatism as much as he could, as much as any president could. Then you have Clinton and Obama. And I would say that these four are birds of a feather. I think Reagan was something different. I think he was an independent president, as much as he could be, as much as any president truly can be, folks. So at least I like to see that they recognize this and they have Obama on here because I talk about this all the time. But yeah, don't let your president get you duded. I don't know. So I don't know what that is. It's like little tin soldiers, little wind-up soldiers. I don't know. And there's the Kaepernick callback. And then Trump slayed the dragon, which was Kanye. In any case, folks, you can go watch this for yourself. I don't want to continue to go down this rabbit hole. I just wanted to highlight this briefly and show you this video out there. And go watch it, go listen to it if you want. Amazing artwork, but all completely nonsensical propaganda. And I really do wish I could play the lyrics for you, but you can see some of them up on the screen. So whether Paris is actually calling for violence or not, it's another issue. But yeah, I mean, look, it's art. Accept what art is. But art does important things to people. It riles their emotions. So I brought up here the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was the first and original Civil Rights Act. This was enacted or to be enacted after the Civil War. It says not ratified until 1870. Part of this was an issue with Reconstruction. See, most people aren't aware. In the beginning of the Reconstruction period, that is right after the Civil War, the Democrats weren't allowed to vote on anything. They didn't have any power. In fact, several of our amendments, including the 14th Amendment, weren't ratified and passed without the Democrats. So technically they're illegitimate, but that's another issue. It's in the Constitution regardless. Let's see here. It says it mainly intended in the wake of this American Civil War to protect civil rights of persons of African descent born and brought to the United States. The act was passed by Congress in 1865 and vetoed by United States President Andrew Johnson. Now, here we have to understand. It says in April 1866, Congress again passed the bill to support the 13th Amendment, and Johnson again vetoed it. But 2/3 majority of each chamber overrode the veto to allow it to become law without presidential signature. We have to understand this. That is within the Constitution. The president can veto, but the Congress and the Senate can override. It just has to be a 2/3 majority. Now, Andrew Johnson's an interesting case because he was Lincoln's vice president, but he switched. Interestingly, he switched. He assumed the presidency as the vice president at the time of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Johnson was a Democrat who ran with Lincoln on the National Union ticket. He was a Democrat, folks. That's why he outlawed these things. Lincoln was a Republican. He was the first Republican president. The Republican Party was formed as the Abolitionist Party. Before that, you had some variants. You had several different parties that came and went, and essentially the Republican Party began to form, and their main thing on their ticket was abolition. So it says he favored quick restoration of the seceding states of the Union without protections for the former slaves. This led to conflict with the Republican-dominated Congress, culminating in his impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1868. He was acquitted by the Senate by 1 vote. His main accomplishment as president was the Alaska Purchase. So again, understand the history here. The vice president was a Democrat under Lincoln, and he vetoed the original Civil Rights Act, and the Congress and Senate had to come together and override him. Here is a list of the last century of the Republicans and Democrats who held the party. Now, I want to go back to this real quick because this is a little bit clearer of a visual for the entirety of the United States history prior to the Civil War. So here it says 1855 to 1857. Now, it talks about Republican and Democrat here. That's not quite true because there was a mix, but let's just look at this. Here, from this period on until the early 1900s, the Senate had essentially ruled by the Republicans, and the House essentially ruled by the Republicans, and there was some split in a few years, and there were like Republican or red presidents. And then what you have is here, this is the beginning of the FDR progressive era. Now, the progressive era actually started a bit before that, but what we really see, and by the way, the progressive era was really set in by Teddy Roosevelt, folks. He just wasn't that far of a progressive. I actually want to go into a little history lesson of himself there. But by the time FDR came along, I mean, it was like, screw the Constitution. Who cares? We don't need that thing. And then we see the differences. So for 14 years, and then another 26 years, and then 40 years, we have Democratic control. Now, again, this is a bigger bird's eye view. This particular chart here shows from 1933 to 2010. It's not quite 100 years, but close. And what do we see? 1933. Well, we have a Democratic president, Congress, and Senate, unified government, all the way up until Truman. Truman then getting us involved into Korea, which essentially is what brought Eisenhower in. So there was a year where the Republicans took over here, and then it went back Democrat, and then there was another year under Eisenhower, his first year, where the Republicans took over. Now, specifically, Eisenhower helped with the Civil Rights Act, and if it wasn't for him, that probably never would have gone. He sent troops into Little Rock, Arkansas, to desegregate schools because the governor would not do so. Now, this is an article from Politico. This is from 2007. Eisenhower was a key desegregation figure. We will come back to that. So, we see this with Eisenhower, and then look at this. Okay, so he's the president, and we get Democrat, Congress and Senate. We get the Kennedy years, all Democrats. Nixon years, all Democrats. Now you have Nixon. He was a Republican. Nixon, by the way, was our first neocon president. I will say that a million times. The only Republican president before that was maybe as progressive as Nixon was Herbert Hoover. Perhaps Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't think he went as far as Hoover did. And then you have Carter years, and then the Reagan years. Now, there was some divide here with the Senate. But then, at the end, again, mostly unified. Now, it says divide, but look at the colors, folks. I'm going to shrink this a little bit so we can see. It says Republicans, others, Democrats, but it shows the Senate. So here, it's the majority, 53 versus 47. That's where the divide is at, but that's a thin margin. Thin margin. So let's get this to a nice, appropriate size for you all. I think that was where I was at. And we can see here that the House, Democrats, Republicans in that aisle, the House was owned by the Democrats. Look at this compared to the Republicans. Like, they have a large majority. And then under the Clinton years, finally, for once, since the Truman or Eisenhower years, look at this thin majority here. Same here, very thin majority. One vote under Eisenhower for the Republicans in the Senate. Not even 10 votes here for the House. And then finally we get this. And again, razor sharp, razor close under the Clinton years. And then this went into GW and later on with Obama to some degree, and it flipped back. But the bigger picture that I want you to understand, I want you to see, look at the totality of this map. The Democrats have run the federal government for the last 100 years. It doesn't matter who is in the presidency. We only have a few years of Republican control, and we know what happened under Republican control. Not much, and mostly things that Democrats like to do, and under the Bush years, war. But let's not be mistaken about that war either, because obviously Roosevelt got us into war. You could say that was justified, but Truman got us into war. It was the first time the war powers was used by the president. Before that, Congress always had to vote on war, and they didn't. Largely why Eisenhower got into office. Johnson got us into Vietnam. Now, Eisenhower had some aides or advisors, whatever you wish to call them, in Vietnam, but he did not escalate with war. Kennedy sort of escalated war a little bit with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but understandable what was going on off our coast, right? Nuclear missiles in Cuba, potentially. The Bay of Pigs, of course, being a big failure. But Johnson got us very heavily involved in Vietnam, and Nixon was supposed to get us out, which he did. And then Ford was just the continuation of Nixon, and of course didn't get reelected. Carter was a disaster. Reagan did some small military actions, but really didn't get us too involved in war, and most of it was in our backyard. Now, people were like, well, he brought us onto the brink of thermonuclear destruction. I don't think so. I think Reagan was, much like Trump, a better strategist than the media likes to give him credit. And he knew he could outspend the Soviets. And because communism doesn't work, folks. It just doesn't work. And he also was a stiff, staunch negotiator. It's one of the reasons why he could get things done with this Congress. Of course, GW got us into the Gulf War, which was, globalist nonsense. Clinton had us involved in Somalia. He had us involved in Kosovo. There was stuff there, but we did some rocket launches. We did stuff under Clinton, but no big wars. And then GW got us into the big one, and Obama, of course, continued that and allowed ISIS to build up. Now, Trump is claiming right now that he's going to get troops out of Afghanistan by the end of the year if he gets reelected. So that's amazing in my opinion. So again, you can go back, you can look at this. Now, this is an interesting kind of chart that I think shows here. Let's get this back in dark mode. Well, I guess that don't work. But it shows here, this is during the Civil War and then Reconstruction, right? Here's where we talk about Andrew Johnson was the president. You can see Republican run. Then the House gets taken. Republican run again to some degree. And the House gets taken, and then the presidency. And Republican run up until the beginning of the Progressive Era. This is exactly when the Progressive Era started to set in, folks. And because of this, by the way, if you look at the economics that went on in this period, this is actually when we had the most prosperity in America. From the 1880s until the late 1920s, early 1930s, when the Great Depression set in. This would have been Hoover's administration. It was Republican run. And then here we started setting in the centralized control, the globalism, the fascism, the socialism of the United States, like Social Security, that thing. The federal subsidies for farms, these programs that have been set into place, and these infinite, endless wars we've been involved with. And it's not that we didn't have wars back in these days either, but they were like around the corner, the Mexican-American War, that kind of stuff. Or Spanish-American War. And then here, again, you see Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled, Democrat controlled. 1995, Republican controlled, finally, with a Democratic president. And then it goes back and forth. And then this is the holding pattern that we've been in since the 1980s. So it just goes back and forth. And that's not a good check and balance per se, because a lot of the Republicans, because it goes back and forth, end up adopting the politics of Democrats. And a lot of the Republicans, people like Lindsey Graham or many others who have been in forever, who've been in Congress and Senate forever, are essentially just neocons. They're war hawks. They don't care. John McCain, the late John McCain, was a war hawk. He should have known better. He was a soldier of war, a POW. All right, from the American Thinker. This was July 2020. Republicans led the way on civil rights. The Republican Party was founded largely to fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence, and all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Republicans cannot represent who we are and to the American people if we forget who we are and accept attempts to distort and change our history. Instead of sincerely apologizing, Democrats simply lie about Republicans. This is true. So Kamala Harris and today Amy Klobuchar have now both said that President Lincoln did not appoint someone to the Supreme Court right before the election because he was a good man and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. Absolute and utter lie. The Senate was adjourned. They were home. And believe it or not, in the 1860s, you couldn't catch a plane to Washington overnight. You couldn't catch a plane and fly out and be in Washington, D.C. in 6 or 8 hours to have a confirmation hearing. He had to wait until they reconvened. And when that happened, he immediately put somebody in that seat. This is including the conveniently sidelined Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The grand old party has actually led the way on civil rights, constitutional rights, and equality before the law. This is all true. I'm not saying they've been 100% awesome on it, but the Democrats have not been the ones doing this, folks. The Civil Rights Act were important Republican accomplishments that we must not let the country forget. It started with the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Eisenhower endorsed civil rights legislation in his early 56 State of the Union address. Running on a civil rights platform, the GOP incumbent then easily defeated Democrat candidate Alade Stevenson and increased his vote totals in the South in 1956 over the 1952 election. Now, the Democrats are going to, they want to say the party switched. There was a Southern strategy. I'm going to probably talk about more of that tomorrow. But just understand that that's utter propaganda. It's an utter lie meant to manipulate your mind. So, in 1957, Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent Congress a proposal for civil rights legislation, which he proposed in his 1956 State of the Union address, designed the bill, engineered it through Congress, and signed it, the first civil rights bill, into law since Reconstruction. That is this Civil Rights Act of 1866. That actually is the precedent for the bill that he was putting into place. Back when Republicans actually had backbones, I agree. The Republican National Committee issued a press release August 6, 1957, attacking the U.S. Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, for opposing the Republican civil rights legislation, which he did. Now, later on, as president, he allowed legislation through. The RNC exposed how Democrats, including LBJ, as late as 1957, were fighting against the rights of African Americans. By this legislation, Eisenhower created a civil rights section of the U.S. Department of Justice, empowered federal prosecutors to get court orders enjoining interference with the right of blacks to vote, the establishment of civil rights commissions. The final act was weakened by Congress from Eisenhower's draft due to lack of support from the Democrats. However, as the Western Illinois Historical Review explains, prior to 1957, Southern congressmen and senators prevented any legislation from passing for decades due to their domination of powerful committees and their use of filibusters. The 1957 act showed cracks in the system. Eisenhower's Civil Rights Act of 1957 was a genuine game changer because Republicans opened the door to getting legislation passed, not because it was the one and only civil rights bill needed. Now, let's look at this little list again. So, 1957, who was there? Well, you had a Congress with a 234 majority over 201 minority, Republican minority, and then a 2-seat majority in the Senate. Now, that changed in the last 2 years of Eisenhower's administration to an even stronger majority, 283 seats from the Democrats to 154, meaning the Democrats essentially would have a supermajority and 64 to 34 seats in the Senate. This, my friends, is the reality. So, later that year, Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10730 on September 23rd, 1957, desegregation of Central High School. And this is where he had to send in the National Guard. Next, the Republicans passed the Civil Rights Act of 1960. And so forth. Now, down here, after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson submitted the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to Congress in Kennedy's name. However, Democrats in the United States filibuster in 1964 legislation, led partially by United States Senator Robert C. Byrd, former congressman of West Virginia, a KKK exalted Cyclops. This is true. He was. This is actually my district. Now, he's dead. I haven't lived here, didn't live here during his reign, but he just died a few years ago. He remained in Congress until he died. But man, died 10 years ago or something, if that. And he was an exalted Cyclops. Bill Clinton went to his funeral. He was like, oh, he was just a good old boy. Back in his day, you had to join the Ku Klux Klan to get in with the good old boys. Okay, Billy boy. Okay. It took Republicans to break the filibuster. Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield bypassed the Judiciary Committee chair and anti-civil rights Democrats. The filibuster lasted 57 working days and was broken when 27 Republican senators, 82% of Republican senators, and 46% of Democratic senators, 68% of Democratic senators voted for Coulter. Without overwhelming Republican support for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it would have died over a Democratic-led filibuster. Now, I'm not going to read this whole article. You can see it goes on a little bit more. It gets more into details because I don't need to get into the details. You need to educate yourself. You can read this article. It's from the American Thinker. It was just printed in July. It's called Americans Led the Way on Civil Rights Act, and it's written by Jonathan Mosley. So go find it. Go look it up. Educate yourself. So this is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And if we go down, at some point, well, it talks about what it is. At some point, it talks about who voted for it, who didn't. But if I can't find that right away, yeah, that's all right. I'll be all right. We got this. And this is just as good, if not better. So what I have here, folks, is government.track.us, and this will tell you any year, any bill, who voted for what. So, of all voters, this is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Of all voters, 70% said yay, 30% said nay. See this little bar. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. There we go. So see that bar. See how it is kind of divided. You have Democrats, 153 voting for this, and 136 Republicans voting for this. 91 Democrats opposed and only 35 Republicans. Now, most of those Republicans were either in the South listening to their constituents or doing the politics of the day, or they were people like William F. Buckley, who essentially opposed it because it's unconstitutional. And the reason why it was unconstitutional is because the federal government cannot mandate to the states against the 10th Amendment. So he actually had a real case there. But, lost him an election over that because people wanted this change. But 35, folks, 35. And I have people today, I've had a conversation with people over the interwebs about this. And they'll go, oh, no, the Republicans. No. And they go, what about the Southern strategy? The parties switched. No. Never happened. 2 Democrats voting president. 7 did not vote. Now, you had 5 Republicans not vote, 2, and 2, fine. but the percentage is way different. Now this visual is important. So this is the voting chart. This is the Democrats who voted. Right down here's a key. The empty slots are the ones who didn't. This gives you a very good visual of percentages here. So on the right, and we talked about left-right divide that comes from the French Revolution, but on the right you have the folks who are conservative, constitutionalist, believe in the founding, and then on the left you have the progressives. And this is just typical stuff, folks. Like, this is the reality. The Civil Rights Act, if it had not been for the Republicans over here, would never have been passed. And in California right now, they're repealing their statewide Civil Rights Act. So, Daily Signal, fact check. More Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act as a percentage than Democrats did. This was December 17th, 2018. And so I went through this article before. It says verdict true, but then it kind of gets into the other stuff. Talked about how Ben Shapiro said this or that. For the land, what if, someone else, Franklin Foer, wrote an article for the Atlantic. What if the moderate Republicans of the late 1950s and early 60s had aggressively owned the civil rights agenda and rendered the cause of racial justice a bipartisan concern? By the way, they did, responded Shapiro. Yeah, they actually did. But that's the thing, is these people were so ill-educated, they've never studied this, or they're just outright lying to you. It's that Saul Alinsky tactics. They don't really care what the truth is. They only care about power, right? Right makes right. Might makes right. And then so here it goes on about Southern members of Congress signed the Southern Manifesto, voicing their opposition to the ruling in the 1954 Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education, which was that separate but equal, which is a former Supreme Court holding, no longer exists, essentially, and that schools must be integrated, which declared that segregated public schools were unconstitutional. Democrats were geographically divided on matters of civil rights, while Republicans largely represented non-Southern states and were more unified. The most commonly cited of the Civil Rights Act is the one passed in 1964. Shapiro called the Daily Caller News Foundation, was referring to the 1964 Act, originally proposed in 1963 by former President John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. Blah, 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 blah. Employment discrimination illegal. Actually, and personally, I don't agree with that. I'm not saying, I want people to be bigots, but like, you can employ who you want to employ, folks. It's called a freedom of association. And for you to tell me because someone's skin color I have to hire them, I think it's absurd. In fact, I think that makes you a bigot. And there have been examples, plenty of examples. I believe Larry Elder had brought up a theater that people used to go to because they allowed black and whites back in the day. It might not have been him. It might have been Thomas Sowell. That's probably who it was. They're close friends. They might have been having a conversation and talking about it. Why I can't remember who said it, but it was probably Thomas Sowell, because it would have been probably when he was a young man. And he said that there's a theater that was whites only, and it was more expensive, and people would go down to the mixed theater all the time. That's just a market force, folks. That's what happens. You can't keep up segregation without the force of the government, because the government has the guns. They are the monopolistic power. Without the force of the court, the government, the power to arrest, the power to lock you away, the power to murder you, markets will always provide. This is what the communists don't understand. They can't get it. They're too simple-minded. I'm actually going to probably come up with a new segment talking about some of that stuff, but I'll save that for later. So anyways, here again from Politico, Eisenhower is a key in desegregation. So Stanford University, Little Rock, school desegregation. 3 years after the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, Brown versus the Board of Education, that separate education facilities are inherently unequal, 9 African-American students attempted to integrate into Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. The students known as the Little Rock Nine were recruited by Daisy Bates, president of the Arkansas branch of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Wonder when they're going to change their name to People of Color, by the way. As president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, Martin Luther King, blah, 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 had worked with Dwight D. Eisenhower on September 4th, 1957, the first day of school at Central High. A white mob gathered in front of the school. The governor, Orville Fabos, deployed the Arkansas National Guard to prevent the black students from entering. In response to the action, the NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall won a federal district court injunction to prevent the governor from blocking the students' entry. With the help of police escorts, the students successfully entered the school through a side entrance on the 23rd of September. Fearing escalating mob violence, however, the students were rushed home soon afterwards. So this continued. President Eisenhower urged him to take a strong, forthright stand in the Little Rock situation. This was Dr. King, sent a telegram to him. King told the president that if the federal government did not take a stand against the injustice, it would set a process of integration back 50 years. This is a great opportunity for you, the federal government, to back up the longings and aspirations of millions of people of goodwill and make law and order a reality. Notice how Martin Luther King talks directly to the president instead of, rioting and burning down things. Aware that the Little Rock incident was becoming an international embarrassment, Eisenhower reluctantly ordered troops from the Army's 101st Airborne to protect the students, who were shielded by federal troops and Arkansas National Guard for the remainder of the school year. So, in a telegram, King praised the president's actions. I wish to express my sincere support for the stand you have taken and restore law and order to Little Rock, Arkansas. You know that the overwhelming majority of Southerners, Negro and white, stand firmly behind your resolute action. Interesting, because the left would have you believe the majority of the South are all a bunch of racist bigots. And I actually think otherwise. And here we can look at the 84th Congress and some of the things that they passed. This was the Congress of Eisenhower's day, during the third and fourth years of his presidency. And we have, CARES Incentive Act, Flood Control, God We Trust Plan, Air Pollution Control Act, Multiple Surface Use Mining Act, Reserve Forest Act, National Housing Act, Polio, Meningitis, Vaccination Assistance Act, Colorado Spring Storage Act, Federal Aid Highway Act, Health Research Facilities Act, Fish and Wildlife Act, and nothing about civil rights. So here it shows, again, the party, Democrat, Independent, Republican, that is let's see. The party changes membership selections below the state. Oh, it doesn't give me enough specifics here. But, okay, I guess that was the Senate. That's what I figured because of the numbers. But, slight majority. And then here it shows the majority, the end of the previous Congress, and then the minority coming back there. And then it shows Democratic leaders, whatever else. I don't really want to get into all that. What I want to do is come back, finish this up tomorrow. Why does this keep appearing? And tomorrow I want to talk about the Klan, labor unions, the cities of the United States, what actual white supremacists, who they're backing and what they believe, and why the Democratic Party is not the savior and bastion of civil rights, and how they only use civil rights to prop up their own power. I'm also going to talk about the origins of the dog whistle and where the notion of the Southern strategy comes from and how absurd it is. It's absolutely absurd because the South did not have Republican representation largely until the 1990s, which means they waited 30 years to switch. There was no Southern switch, folks. Didn't happen. Or there was no party switch. So with all that, if you guys want to watch the live show, we have a live show. On occasion, we have guests, myself and a co-host producer. It's a much looser show. It's a fun show. It's called TheEnds Justify the Memes. You can find us at ends_justify memes over on DLive. And we have replays, a replay YouTube channel, TheEnds Justify the Memes. And then I also have a subscribe star if anyone wants to be kind and donate and help me and my family out. Otherwise, whatever. I'm going to keep making these. And with all that, folks, that's all I got for today. And just remember, like, share, and subscribe. Leave comment. Do all that stuff. I hope you enjoyed this. Educate yourselves, folks. Don't fall into these traps of propaganda that are everywhere. And, hey, this has been AllMinucOne, and I wish you all well.